conference, the Catholic Culture Conference. Archbishop Charles Chaput wrote, quote, "God has never been more absent from the Western mind than he is today. This absence is manifested, in Chaput's words, by, quote, a basic confusion about what, if anything at all, it means to be human. Our culture has failed to protect and to promote these truths, and failed to provide a fertile soil in which faith and family can readily flourish. Make no mistake, the faith and family are flourishing for some, but often this seems to be the exception rather than the rule. We've witnessed the death of Christian culture and are now tasked with its restoration, to borrow from the titles of two books from Dr. John Sr. Archbishop Chaput describes culture as, quote, the framework within which we locate ourselves in relationship to other people, find meaning in the world, and then transmit meaning to others. Faith and culture are inseparable. No community, be it a parish, city, state, or an entire country, can be characterized by both strong private faith and weak public culture. It's impossible. As St. John Paul II eloquently said, faith that does not become culture is not fully embraced, fully thought, or faithfully lived. Just a couple of months ago, Sophia Institute Press published a book entitled Catholic Republic, Why America Will Perish Without Rome. Maybe some of you have seen this. In it, author Timothy Gordon points out that the decline in America's political morality, which we've witnessed in recent decades, was really inevitable, given the fact that our country was founded to be a republic dependent upon a Catholic understanding of the human person. Yet the majority of its citizens reject this Catholic humanism in preference of an anthropological narrative coming out of one of two places, either the Enlightenment or the Protestant Reformation, or sometimes a mix of both. According to Gordon, a republic cannot survive unless persons are considered to be morally free, intelligent, and teleological, meaning made with an end purpose in mind. Those are the three necessary conditions for people to thrive in a republic. With these presuppositions, true liberty, or in other words, providing each person the opportunity to pursue happiness unimpededly by protecting human rights, is impossible. And we're left only with license, which is the flimsy attempt to allow people to pursue pleasure rather than happiness by offering them pseudo-rights, which end up becoming, quote, anti-rights, to use Gordon's phrase. And we'll talk more about that. Today is the feast of the visitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary to the home of her cousin Elizabeth. In his reflection on today's gospel, Bishop Robert Barron focuses on the haste with which Mary set out to the hill country upon hearing the angel's message. According to Barron, quote, she had found her mission, her role in the theodrama. We are dominated today by the ego drama and all of its ramifications and implications. We continue to quote Barron here. The ego drama is the play that I'm writing, that I'm producing, I'm directing, and I'm starring in. We see this absolutely everywhere in our culture. Freedom of choice reigns supreme. I become the person that I choose to be. The theodrama is the great story being told by God, the great play being directed by God. What makes life thrilling is to discover your role in it. This is precisely what happened to Mary, says Barron. She has found her role, indeed a climactic role, in the theodrama, and she wants to conspire with Elizabeth, who has also discovered her role in that same drama. Like Mary, we have to find our place in God's story. I'd now like to welcome our keynote speaker this weekend, Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse. Dr. Morse is the founder of the Ruth Institute, a global nonprofit organization that defends the family at home and in the public square, and equips others to do the same. She is passionate about equipping family advocates with the knowledge and confidence to defend the family at home and in the public square. Dr. Morse was a campaign spokeswoman for California's winning Proposition 8 campaign. Some of you remember that, defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman. She has authored or co-authored 5 books and has spoken around the globe on marriage, family, and human sexuality. She earned her PhD at the University of Rochester and taught economics at Yale and George Mason universities. Dr. Morse was named one of the Catholic Stars of 2013 on a list that included Pope Francis and Pope Benedict XVI. Dr. Morse and her husband are parents of an adopted child, a birth child, a goddaughter, and were foster parents for San Diego County to 8 foster children. In 2015, Dr. Morse and her husband relocated to Lake Charles, Louisiana, where the work of the Ruth Institute continues. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Is my volume turned up? I don't know what happened to the sound guy. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to be giving 3 talks over the course of this weekend, and I hope that all of you will be there for all of them. If you like the talk tonight, you should text your friends and tell them to come tomorrow. I presume that's okay, Dusty? People come tomorrow? So what we're going to do is to tonight, what we're going to do is try to understand the sexual revolution. Tonight we'll be understanding the sexual revolution. Tomorrow I'll be talking about the gender ideology, and then in the afternoon I'll be talking about Dr. J, that's me. That's because I slam dunk things. Anyway, I'll be talking about Dr. J's 3.5-step plan for saving the culture and the church. So tonight, understanding the sexual revolution, and this is the basic outline of what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to explain to you what I think is the sexual revolution, kind of how I unpack it and define it, and then we'll talk about how the sexual revolution actually operates. Now, how are we going to understand the sexual revolution and how it operates, okay? So first of all, I'm going to talk to you about the difference between the structure of the sexual revolution and then kind of the day-to-day details. Now, I know for a fact, probably everybody here knows, that if I start saying to you, this particular crazy thing happened today, and that's what the sexual revolution is all about, by this time tomorrow, there'll be some other, even crazier thing, correct? Right? So in that level, the day-to-day thing of the sexual revolution, you cannot keep up with it. I cannot keep up with it. It can't be done. What we will do instead is to try to give you a structure to understand, so when that next round of craziness hits, you'll kind of know what to do with it. You'll know how to analyze it and you'll have some principles for dealing with it. And so that's the point of the book, The Sexual State. That's part of what that book does. You know, that book came out last summer, and it was out of, from the perspective of the day-to-day, it was out of date the minute it was published, you know, because things just keep happening, and that's the way it is. But the structure, I think the structure will last for a long time and be helpful in a great many settings. So the second way that I want to understand the sexual revolution is the difference between givers and doers. Now, this is something somebody on my staff told me. People are either givers or doers. The people who like to give don't like to do. They'll write you a check and say, go away, leave me alone. You do your mission on your own, you know? And then you got people who are doers, who want to be out there, getting it done. And a lot of times those people don't care to give, a lot of times they don't have the money, right? So you've got 2 different kinds of people here. You've got the givers who don't do, and the doers who don't give. And that actually, I just want you to know, that's okay with me, but it is not permissible for anyone to be idle, says Pope John Paul II. You must do something. Either give or do, but you must do something. People, what would it take to get you off the bench? How much crazier does it have to get out there before you're going to do something? Okay? That's all I'm going to say. Give or do, but don't just sit there. All right. For now, you can sit. It's okay. Okay. Now, besides just understanding stuff, a lot of times, you know, I'm a college professor. You know, we kind of stand up here and we talk, and it's all supposed to go in your head. And if you just get the thoughts right, everything's going to be okay. But then there are some things we have to do as well as understand. So we have I'm going to be giving you calls to action. Now, a call to action is a very specific instruction, and in marketing, some of you are probably in marketing, people will tell you that if the call to action isn't clear, your marketing piece is going to fail. If people don't know what they're supposed to do, you know, you just wasted your money on your thing. So this is my personal favorite call to action. Turn left now, okay? And it's the Little Caesars pizza guy. And so when you see the Little Caesars pizza guy, you know you're going to get pizza, and you know what kind of pizza it's going to be, and roughly what it's going to cost, and how it's going to taste, and you can probably smell it while I'm even sitting here talking to you about it. But he's very clear. He just not like, you know, if you kind of feel like, if you're feeling it for pizza, you might want to just kind of go over here. No, turn left now. Okay. Very clear call to action. So my intention is to give you some clear instructions both tonight and tomorrow so that you will not be confused, you will know what to do. Because a lot of you want to do something but you don't know what to do. So we're going to deal with that, all right? So first off, you got to know what the Ruth Institute is. So when you see the Ruth Institute, when you see that little symbol, I want you to know who we are. The Ruth Institute is a global nonprofit organization equipping Christians to defend the family and to build a civilization of love. That's who we are. Now there's two other things I want you to think about. First off, when you see the Ruth Institute, when you see our little logo, I want you to think, these people know what they're talking about. We do not shoot from the hip at the Ruth Institute. We know what we're talking about. So last year we had the role of sexual orientation, the clerical abuse scandal, the sexual state, pamphlets that are filled with research and stuff, okay? This is serious business. And when you think Ruth Institute, they know what they're talking about. That's point one. Point two, my favorite bird. The yellow-crowned night heron. Y'all have one right out there in this pond over here. I saw one this afternoon. Now what I want you to notice about this bird, you can see, of course, that he's wearing horn-rimmed glasses, right? Right? Okay, and they're very intense. They're looking at their shellfish order. In Louisiana, it's shellfish they're looking at. I don't know what that guy's eating out there. Anyway, they're very intense. So in our family, we refer to this guy as the nerd bird. Okay? So if you're associated with the Ruth Institute, you're going to think about me probably, and I will give you something to do. We're going to have some fun doing it, and it will probably be slightly nerdy. Okay, so we have the nerd bird for that very reason. Myself, I'm the type of person, a table of numbers will make my heart beat fast, and tomorrow afternoon I will show you some tables of numbers so you can participate in that. But I realize that not everyone feels that way. Go figure. Anyway, okay, so call to action number one. Call to action number one. I would like you to, I'm inviting you to sign up for the Ruth Institute newsletter. I'm not going to yell it. Sign up now for the Ruth Institute newsletter. The reason being, I will send you these slides. When this is done, you'll get a PDF copy of the slides. So therefore, you don't have to scribble down every single thing that I say while it's going by. Also, while we're doing this, I'm going to ask you guys to pass these out on this side. I've got two brochures for you, and I'll be talking about these during the course of the talk this evening, so you can circulate those too. Okay, and this, by the way, this is a way of keeping up with the day-to-day business. Okay, so every week we come out with stuff, and you'll see us talking about whatever happened in the news that week. And that's the way we can keep up with it. All right, so, sign out now. Okay, all right, now, that's the funny thing, that funny little guy was saying, turn left now. All right, one of the things I learned in the process of doing the research for the sexual state is that we, people who believe in the family, we're not left or right. We're not really conservative or liberal. I think of us as the catechism Catholics, okay? So I don't care what your positions are on any other subject. If you will talk to me about the family, I will talk to you. Because this is what we need to embrace, is the catechism, the full truth of the catechism, and let all of the other issues just kind of fall to one side. By the way, I should also mention to you that the Ruth Institute, everything we do is in keeping with the teachings of the Catholic Church, but we are not a strictly speaking Catholic organization. We have many of my employees are not Catholic. Many of the people who lecture for us are not Catholic. If they agree with church teaching in their area of expertise, I want the best person I can find who believes that. So, we've got people from all different religions who believe what the church teaches on different things, and I feel it's very important that we as Catholics not keep this to ourselves. and that we reach out to others who want to hear about this. So, all right. I think I already said this. We're beyond left and right. And in the book, I'm not going to say too much about that tonight, but in the book I do spend some time talking about left versus right and why that doesn't really work on these issues. So this book came out last year, and it was called The Sexual State, How Elite Ideologies Are Destroying Lives, and Why the Church Was Right All Along. And within a few weeks of this book coming out, the whole scandal with Theodore McCarrick hit the press. Okay, and so it's like, that's kind of an unfortunate subtitle, that the church was right all along. But actually, in a way, it wasn't unfortunate, because it's not that every single person in the church is right, it's that the church's teaching is right. And in fact, I think that the events that have happened since have really shown that. So I think we must insist on 2 points: that we want justice in the clergy abuse sexual scandal. We want justice to be done. And also, we want to teach and proclaim the church's teaching on sexual ethics. The church's teaching on sexual ethics is good and true and humane. And as a matter of fact, if we had done that, none of this bad stuff would have happened, right? So just when I say justice, just briefly, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but just briefly, justice in the clergy sexual abuse scandal means punishment for the guilty, protection for the innocent, like the innocent clergy whose names are being sullied by, because everybody's under suspicion, kind of a thing, justice for them, and restoration for the victims. And short of that, we're just messing around. This has to be the ultimate goal, that we address all of that. And the reason we want to proclaim the church's sexual ethics is that we have to include marriage, family, and sexual conduct in all that we do. Those are all linked to each other. And we can't count on the clergy to do it. For a long time, people would say, why don't the bishops do this? Why doesn't Father say that? Well, now we kind of know why some of them aren't talking about it, because it kind of makes them uneasy. Because they've got a guilty conscience, or they've got something else going on that they're not comfortable talking about it. Well, therefore, we have to do it. Because the truth is still the truth, and the church's teaching is true and good and humane. And as a matter of fact, none of this nonsense would have happened if people had been living up to the church's teaching. So we need this more now than ever. So, call to action number 2, take out your phone. Phone? People have phones in Kansas? You got a phone? Go to the Ruth Institute Facebook page and like our Facebook page. You can do that right now. I won't be offended if you look at your phone. Of course, if you look at your phone 5 minutes from now, I will be. But no, not true. So, and the reason I want you to do that is, again, this is a place where we're up to date, reporting on things that are happening as they're happening. You can engage in conversation with people. You can see what we're saying about it. You can see some of the latest research. All right, and we often have things for you to do over there on the Ruth Institute Facebook page. So now, let's talk about the definition of the sexual revolution. What do I mean when I say the sexual revolution? To my way of thinking, everything that we think of as part of the sexual revolution can be fitted into 3 different categories, and I'm going to give them to you right now. The sexual revolutionaries believe that a good and decent society should do 3 things. 1, we should separate sex from babies. We should do everything possible to separate sex from babies. This is the mark of a good society, right? You recognize that? That we have people in our world who think that? I call that the contraceptive ideology. Secondly, we have people who believe that we should do everything possible to separate both sex and babies from marriage. I refer to that as the divorce ideology. So you can get married, you don't have to be married to have sex, you don't have to be married to have a baby. I call that the divorce ideology for reasons that I'll explain in a moment. And then finally, a good and decent society should wipe out all differences between men and women, except those that are explicitly chosen by individuals. And I refer to that as the gender ideology. Now, the gender ideology, I'm going to give a whole talk on that tomorrow, so I won't talk too much about it today. But I do want to go through these 3 ideologies briefly for you and show you how they fit together. Now, if you're interested in any of them, I have a 45-minute talk on each one of those 3 things, and that's the URL for them, so you can go find that at the Ruth Institute podcast page. Again, I will send you these slides, so you don't have to write this down. But if these topics interest you, there's plenty more information available. And of course, it's in the book too. A lot of it's in the book too. All right, so the contraceptive ideology. Sex and babies should be separated. That's a good thing to separate sex from babies. Now, I think most of us here are old enough to recognize this, that this is part of our society. A lot of us grew up in a time when it wasn't as true as it is now. But the basic goal of that, of thinking like that, is that sex is an entitlement. Guilt-free, problem-free, child-free sex is an entitlement, right? And who actually thinks like that? I mean, honestly, who thinks sex is an entitlement? The predator thinks that sex is an entitlement. But somehow in our society, we've managed to convince ourselves that we're all going to be the ones using the other person, and we're never going to be the person being used in this whole arrangement where everybody's entitled to do whatever they want. So now, I gave you this pamphlet, the Manifesto for the Family. Take a look at that. Let's open that up now. And I want to just point out to you of just a couple of items on this. This is the 15-point Manifesto of Change for the Family. It's based on the last chapter of the book. We just turned it into a pamphlet. And you'll see a few items that pertain directly to the contraceptive ideology, okay? The first 10 items on this platform, on my manifesto, are 10 things that the government should stop doing, that it never had any business doing in the first place. If any of you have libertarian friends who want to get the government out of this and that and the third thing, you take this pamphlet and you put it right in their face, and you say, here are 10 things the government needs to stop doing. You, Mr. Libertarian, then they're almost always guys, right? You, Mr. Libertarian, let's work on this, okay, shall we? Okay, so the one thing the government must stop doing is the government must stop promoting and subsidizing contraception. I mean, it's one thing for it to be legal. It's another thing for the government to be actively promoting its use to children, to poor people, and to all and sundry. Also, I think there's another one in there, separate from this one. Overseas. We promote it overseas. Federal, United States taxpayers are promoting this stuff around the world. And a lot of other countries are not happy with us, shall we say, about doing this. So where are the libertarians when we need them, to be saying, no, we should not be doing this. We need to stop doing this. And then we should abolish abortion. The government has no business legalizing private killing. And that's what this is. And this is all a way of propping up the fantasy that sex can be a child-free, problem-free activity. And the government should stop doing this. So, next we have the divorce ideology, the second of our three interlocking ideologies, the divorce ideology. So the divorce ideology is based on the idea that children don't really need their parents. That the adults can switch out their sex partners and their living arrangements any way they want, and the kids will be fine. Because after all, the kids are resilient. You all know that, right? The kids are resilient. They'll be fine. So the Ruth Institute has a dream that every child be welcomed into a loving home with their own mother and father married to each other. So that every child can have a relationship with his or her own parents unless some unavoidable tragedy prevents it. Now, what's an unavoidable tragedy? Somebody dies. Somebody's mentally ill. Something like that. That's an unavoidable tragedy. And we have adoption to make provision for those situations where something unavoidable has happened. I'm fed up with your father is not an unavoidable tragedy. Because a lot of times marriages end because somebody's tired. Or they have a new boyfriend. I have a new boyfriend. I have a new girlfriend. I have a younger wife. I have a new boyfriend with more resources than you. Okay, those are not unavoidable tragedies. Also, so that every adult, without exception, can know his or her cultural heritage and genetic identity. This is very important in the era of third-party reproduction and same-sex marriage, where people are thinking that I'm entitled to have a child even though I don't have a partner of the opposite sex. So what do? You purchase a gamete and you have the government separate the parent from that child so that that child is now a legal stranger to their donor, to the donor gamete, and you have the government provide you with a falsified birth certificate so that the child can never know who that person is. That's the government making that happen. That's what it means. So even if you have an unavoidable tragedy and can't be with your mom and dad, at least you should know who they are, right? At least you should be allowed to know who they are. And this whole industry that has grown up is based on the premise that it doesn't matter. The kids will be fine. As long as the adults get what they want, the kids will be fine. So when these rights of children are violated, at the Ruth Institute, we call this a structural injustice to the child. It's about the structure being not what it ought to be. It's not because the parents are mean or incompetent or unkind or anything like that. It's that there's something wrong with the structure of the family that they can't really make up very well, even if they're doing their very best. And some of you who have experienced perhaps blended and reconstituted families and step families and so on, you'll know that there are a lot of complications a lot of times that can't be easily healed. Even with the best of intentions, even with the best of efforts, people still have feelings and losses and senses of loss and so on, which we are not really supposed to acknowledge or talk about because the adults get to do what they want. It's supposed to be okay. All right, so we have competing worldviews here. That every child, our position is that every child and hence every adult has identity rights and relational rights with respect to their parents. And
don't tell anybody, but these rights of children pose obligations on adults.
we're not supposed to say that because nobody wants to believe they actually have any obligation. Now the competing worldview, the competing ideology is every adult has the right to the sexual activity they want with a minimum of inconvenience. And by the way, the government's job is to minimize the inconvenience of your sex life. Every adult has that right, and
children just have to accept whatever the adults choose to give them.
we don't say that too loudly because we'd be ashamed of ourselves if we just blurted it out like that. But that's approximately the position that we're living with now. That's approximately where we are. So now I want to say a few words about why divorce and parental separation is so hard on children. Because for the child, and this is not just for the child, for every human person, the love of your parents is the foundation of the development of your personality. The fact that you're brought into the world as an act of love between your mother and father is foundational to who you are. The identity of those people is foundational to who you are. And so from a child's perspective, when the parents separate, the parents may say something like this, and you've probably heard this done, you may have seen it on TV, you may have seen a little children's book explaining how to do this. We're getting divorced. Mommy and Daddy don't love each other anymore. We still love you, but we don't love each other anymore. Now you're 5 years old and you're listening to this, and you're thinking, of course you can't verbalize all of this for a little child, but in fact, gosh, Mommy's half of who I am, Daddy's half of who I am. They say they love me, but they hate my other parents' guts. How does this even work? It doesn't work. It doesn't add up. Now, back there on the book table, I noticed that he has brought a few copies of the book Primal Loss, which is a compilation of stories from now adult children of divorce, where they talk about what it was actually like for them. What it was like, not just the divorce itself, but oftentimes the remarriage and the aftermath of what it was like to grow up with your parents separated from each other, seeing your parents remarry, have a new child with a new spouse, and you have to go back and forth from one house to the other. But your half-sister gets to be with her mom and dad all the time. Your half-sister gets to have all the photos from both sides of her family surrounding her. Your half-sister gets to have her whole family come to all of her events, but you don't. At your mom's house, there's no pictures of your dad. At your dad's house, there's no pictures of your mom, or any part of that part of your family. And you see from the child's perspective, and some of the story writers in that book will tell you, from the child's perspective, the fundamental injustice of divorce and remarriage. And if I remember correctly, there was a very wise guy once, a long time ago, who told us not to do this. Do you remember this guy? His name was, I think, Jesus something or other. In Matthew 19, he told us not to. What did he say? I think he said, one to a customer for life. Is that about right? I don't think that's, my Greek's not too good. But I think that was roughly the idea, right? And if you look at the research and you listen to the children, what you will find is that the remarriage is the thing that is so hard. It's bad enough that the parents separate, but the remarriage, the attempt to contract a new union, has profound effects on the children. So that book is very much worth getting. I wrote the foreword to it, as a matter of fact. Linda Miller's a good friend of mine. So especially if this is an issue in your family, and this is all I'm going to say about divorce over the course of this weekend. So if this is an issue in your family, in a room this size, there'll be plenty of people who do have this as an issue. I commend that book along with my books too. So these are some of the risks. This is the social science nerdy stuff. I should really have the nerd bird fly in here. Because this is the result of many studies that have been done on the impact of divorce on children. And you see on this chart all of these different things that have to do with health problems and academic problems and mental health problems. My friend Pat Fagan wrote this article that's called The Effects of Divorce on Children, which is a compilation of research on it. 40 closely typed pages with 333 footnotes, and basically it stinks. You know, basically, again, there's the nerd bird has arrived there. Okay, so the point, what I want to get across to you though, is that all those negative outcomes, social science people a lot of times will talk to you about negative outcomes, and that's bad. We want to stop the negative outcomes. But what I will say is that I believe the reason for the negative outcomes is the fundamental injustice that has been done to the child. So it's not the case that if you could somehow enrich their academic environment or give them a bunch of vitamins or something, that it would all be okay. Right? These outcomes aren't the point. These outcomes are the result of the larger problem, which is to say the fundamental injustice to the child of a divorce that takes place that is unjust. Okay? Now that's what we're talking about. We're not, and by the way, I will say this once, we're not talking about people being, quote, forced to stay in abusive marriages. The church does not teach that you have to stay living in the house with an abusive person. The church doesn't teach that. Church has never taught that. That's not true. That's not what we're talking about. But we have to understand that the innovation in divorce has been not how we deal with the abusive marriage, but how we deal with the low conflict marriage. That the marriage that where there isn't abuse, we treat fundamentally differently today than we did 50 years ago. And that's really what we need to keep focused on. All right, so in the Manifesto for the Family, again, we really need to reform divorce laws. Divorce reform is a very serious issue. The only place I know of where it is on the table is in Texas, and I'm working with some people who are talking about various forms of divorce reform in Texas. So now let's say a few words about the gender ideology. As I mentioned tomorrow, I'll talk about that a lot. So I'll just briefly touch on it today. So back in the day, when I was in college and the feminist movement was first hitting, we had the idea that feminism meant that men and women were identical, except that women are better. Right? And so therefore, any differences that you observe between men and women were all socially constructed and certainly unjust, and we should wipe out any observed differences between men and women. Now the new gender ideology it's kind of morphed, and I'll talk a little more about this tomorrow, but it's kind of morphed. So we're not just wiping out the difference between men and women, except for the ones the individual specifically chooses to embrace. So now it's not just that the thing is socially constructed. It's socially constructed, and therefore the individual can personally and individually reconstruct his gender identity. And in either case, what we're saying is that the body is not very significant. You can either override it socially, you can override it with technology, you can override it individually and personally. And have you all seen this photo of Bruce Jenner on the cover of Vanity Fair. This poor lady in the back row is hiding her eyes. You can't avoid this. This is the kind of stuff that is always in our face, right? What I want you to notice is the stereotypical image of what it means to be feminine. Now, I'm looking out in this room, and this room is about half women. None of us are dressed like that. I personally have never dressed like that. And I have been a woman my whole life. Okay? So I'm just saying. Now, this is a quotation from Bruce Jenner. He says, the hardest part about being a woman is figuring out what to wear. And now, I call this clueless Bruce. Okay? I mean, childbirth Bruce. Hello, So, now to be fair, he did walk this back, but this is what some man thinks it means to be a woman. And I think most of the men in this room probably are not operating under that kind of idea that this is what it means to be a woman. But there is now, and I don't want to say too much about this, but I can't resist, there is now tremendous tension among sexual revolutionaries themselves, because many of the old-time feminists, especially lesbian feminists, are very angry about transgenderism. They're very angry about men like Bruce Jenner demanding access to women's spaces. Right? They're very angry about it, and the transgender lobby has mean names for them, and so on and so forth. It's really, in a way, it's, well, it's emblematic of the fact that the ideology is incoherent and is kind of falling apart, right? So there's just one problem with the sexual revolution, which you may have figured out already, and that is that if you're trying to separate sex from babies, there is this small problem that sex actually does make babies, right? I think most of us are old enough to know that, right? Everybody on board with that? Actually, I had somebody argue with me about that one time. I was doing a debate in law school. I said, sex makes babies. My opponent says, no, it doesn't. Oh, says I, what do you mean? And she said, unprotected sex makes babies. See, so there's the contraceptive ideology at work in her mind, right? Entitlement to a child-free sexual experience. Okay, so secondly, separate both sex and babies from marriage. Great idea, except that kids actually do need their parents. Kids really, truly do need their parents, and that's not something that you can overwrite with enough social and cultural reprogramming. Every human being wants their mom and dad, and they want their mom and dad. If their mom and dad are messed up, they want their mom and dad to get it together and be appropriate parents. That's what kids want. And finally, wiping out all differences between men and women. Actually, men and women are different, and the body is significant. The human body is significant. The gendered nature of the human body is significant. I have a chapter in the book called, Are Men and Women Different After All? And it kind of goes through things that go back to in utero differences between men, boys and girls, baby boys and baby girls. So this is the key slide here. This is the key point. The sexual revolution is irrational. It is irrational. It is impossible. It cannot be. It cannot be done. And it can't stand on its own. So it requires continual propping up, continual doses of force, and continual doses of propaganda. I mean, if you are going to build a society around the idea that sex makes babies, this belief system will be confirmed by facts on a regular basis. You will see that sex makes babies. Whoa, what a concept. But if you're trying to build a society around the concept that it doesn't make babies, you're going to have counter evidence popping up all over the place that you're going to have to somehow deal with. You're going to have to somehow deal with and suppress. So that is why, and that is how, the sexual revolution is a totalitarian ideology. And it has been from the beginning. It's now apparent. If you look at the transgender people going after people for using the wrong pronoun, okay, you can easily see now that that is a totalitarian movement. It's about thought control. It's about mind control. But it has been there from the beginning. The totalitarian strain has been there all along. No Christian should have anything to do with this thing. You cannot stand around it. And we've been trying to play nice with it, right? We've been trying to play footsie with it. That can't be done. You've got to give that up. Sorry to burst your bubble, everybody. Of course, you wouldn't have shown up if you were really hanging out of that bubble too much. You wouldn't be here. But anyway, so now we want to talk about how the sexual state actually operates, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit more about propaganda and the victims and proving why it is that winning an argument with a sexual revolutionary is never enough. Because I won a lot of those arguments, and it doesn't seem to amount to anything, so we've got to figure that out. All right, so propaganda. The thing I want you to see here is that the propaganda is relentless, and I want you to start noticing. It's because it's all around you. Now, this particular thing is particularly galling to me. This is from a New York Times headline in 2017. The New York Times, okay, this is not like the National Enquirer or something. This is the New York Times. Had a headline that says, "Why Women Had Better Sex Under Socialism." Now, I don't know how they know this, but they put this on but they think this is news, so they put this in the paper. And look at this photo. I want you to look at this photo. Look at the happy peasant. The happy Russian peasant. She's healthy. She's well scrubbed. She doesn't look skinny. They probably found this in their archives from when they were covering for the Ukrainian family. Right? And the New York Times has a history of this kind of thing. Anyway, the propaganda is pretty much relentless. Now, let me show you a very early example of it. And you'll see it everywhere, I'm telling you. You start thinking about it. Ask yourself, why do they even think this is news? Why do they even have to talk about this? Is this really about socialism or is it really about sex? Well, it's kind of about both, right? But why are they even bringing it? You know, sorry. All right, here's the next one. This is an old one. This is an old one. Now, some of you old pro-life people are probably familiar with this fact. That back in the day, look at the date on that, 1968, the Walt Disney Studios made a video, a cartoon, called The Family Planning Story. And they made this in conjunction with the Population Council, which was John D. Rockefeller III's Organization for Population Control. Now, I'm not going to play this video. You can go find it on the internet. You can play it. It's, I don't know, it says it's 10 minutes. It's got Donald Duck in it, and it's very cute, and it's very appealing, and it makes it very clear that having too many babies makes mommy sad and the baby's skinny. It is propaganda. It is just flat out population control propaganda. It's been around for a long time. And these people have been working this street for a long time. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is a lot of times people will write to me and say, "Dr. Morse, did you see this new study?" You know, I look at the study and go, I hadn't seen the study. It doesn't even matter what it is, right? But there's some new piece of advocacy research, some new piece of garbage, and they want me to dissect it and figure out what's wrong with it. A lot of, and I used to do a lot of that, and I still do it and can do it, but you know, you kind of can't keep up with it. Right? Because there's so much of it. So what I want you to see is that it's propaganda. I want you to be able to identify that it's propaganda coming at you, trying to get you to believe the irrational, right? Trying to make you believe that Bruce Jenner really is a woman, okay? I mean, look, if you can make somebody believe that the 1976 decathlon winner at the Olympics was really a woman, and he really secretly was a woman all along. If you can make people say Bruce Jenner is a woman, you can make them say anything. And that ultimately is the point of the sexual revolution. That ultimately is the point of transgenderism, is making you say something, do something, believe something that is irrational. One time I gave a version of this talk in Connecticut, and a guy stood up who was an emigre from an Eastern Bloc country. And he jumped up and basically patted me on the back for a half hour, you know, or he would have. Because of like, yes, I've been trying to tell everybody, it's great, this is as bad as it was over there, then it's he was very excited that I figured this out, because he couldn't convince anybody, you know, of how deep this corruption really is. Now the second part of how the sexual state operates is that it must silence the victims. Some people are being harmed by the sexual revolution, but you must never hear about them. You must never hear from them. You must never notice that they're being harmed. So, divorce, children of divorce. If the kids are upset, what do? Well, we can't disrupt the ideology, so we take the children for therapy. And we put them how we deal with that. We don't say, oh my gosh, maybe we shouldn't have done this. Right? Right? And so every family thinks they're the only ones that are going through this thing, you know? So this is an example of something that's in the news right now, that many states are trying to outlaw certain types of therapy that would help people deal with their unwanted same-sex attraction. Well, there are a group of people who were once gay and who are no longer gay through a variety of means. Some went through therapy, some did not, some had profound conversion experiences and so on, but they no longer consider themselves gay, even though they once actively lived that lifestyle. So those guys get together and they had the Freedom March in Washington, D.C. last weekend, I think it was, and there were about 200 of them. And the reason they pulled themselves together is because the people writing these therapy ban legislations literally told them, we don't believe you exist. We don't believe there is anybody like you who was once gay and who isn't gay anymore. So therefore, we're going to ban the therapy. Now think about what it means to ban the therapy. See, what it's saying is, if the sexual revolution is not true, if you're not really born gay, if gay is not a permanent feature of your personality, if that's not true for you, we don't want to hear from you. Right? We don't want to hear from you. You have to go away. You have to be silenced. You have to be cut off from anything that could help you be something other than gay. This is a profound attempt to squelch the victims, okay, the people for whom the narrative isn't working. Those of you who've been involved in pro-life work will recognize a similar pattern at work in the way that they treat the pregnancy crisis centers. Okay? I don't know if this is a thing in Kansas. It's a thing in a number of states where the state governments are saying these pregnancy care centers are fraud. And so we're going to regulate them or ban them or just do, basically harass them. It's legalized harassment, okay? That is another form of silencing the victim, silencing the alternative to the sexual revolution ideology and narrative, okay? So this is another group of people. They all say changed on their t-shirt. This is, you can see there's the California flag on one side. They all went to Sacramento to basically say, here we are, guys, we changed. Hello, we exist. You see one guy there with a photo of his family, one guy there with his new baby, and they did this the natural way. They didn't do this through third-party reproduction, what you say. Natural babies. These are natural babies. Anyway, so, but this is part of what we're dealing with. And you can see, now I hope you can see why suppressing the victim is such an important part of the sexual revolution. Because there are always going to be victims. There are always going to be these victims. So our basic strategy is to say, why don't we then make a point of calling attention to the people who've been harmed by the sexual revolution? Why don't we make a point of talking about the victims and survivors of the sexual revolution? And that's what this pamphlet is all about. We'll talk about this a little bit today, but I do want you to bring it tomorrow, because we'll talk about it in more detail tomorrow. If you open up the pamphlet and look at the inside, you'll see a whole list of people, different groups of people who have been harmed by the sexual revolution. Right at the top, we put the children of divorce and the children of unmarried parents. And also we have a group on there, we call them the reluctantly divorced. These are the people who would like to stay married, but because of no-fault divorce, they're not allowed to stay married. Right? We estimate about 70% of divorces have a reluctant spouse, somebody who wants to stay married and who can't stay married. Anyway, so the victims and survivors of the sexual revolution, we have gone through here and just tried to think about who has been harmed by this thing. And as you eyeball that, you'll see some of these different groups. The heartbroken career woman. The heartbroken career woman, that's the person who waits until she's 35 to start her family. This was me. Okay, I got a PhD. I got tenure. I thought, okay, now I'm ready to have a baby. Let's plan it. We've got it all worked out. We'll have the baby. So, time is the baby's born in May. Take care of the baby during the summer. We'll go back to work in the fall. It'll be great. All my colleagues did this. I'm entitled. I'm going to do this. And of course, the baby did not arrive during the month that I had set aside for him. So actually, that was the turning point for me when I came back to the practice of the Catholic faith. But anyway, as mine did, with a profound conversion and Our Lady bashing me over the head. No, it wasn't Our Lady bashing me over the head. She doesn't do that. Someone else bashed me over the head. Anyway, she was nice about it. But you know how Our Lady is. You know, yeah. Okay, you had your cry. Now we have to go tell your dad. Okay. Dad, we'll go tell Dad. Okay. Okay. Anyway, many women, if you think about this, I bet a lot of you know women in this situation who put it off too long and who are not able to have as many children as they want. Right? And we never count them as a loss. We never count that as a cost. And every single one of them has to figure it out for herself what to do. Kind of crazy. Oh, the post-abortive women, the children of divorce, reluctantly divorced, refugees from the hookup culture, that's the name that I gave for people who participated in the hookup culture and are like, what the heck was I even thinking? There are a lot of those people out there. Anyway, that's the point of this pamphlet, is to just start thinking about who are all these people that we never hear about in the news, right? Because if you believe that the church is right, if you believe that the teachings are correct, then you got to know that if you don't do the teachings, if you step outside those lines, that people are going to get hurt. You know, that's just, and it's not because God devises an individual personal lightning bolt just to zap you on the spot. No, it's because in the natural order of things, natural consequences happen, and they're not good, right? If you sin, it's not good. All right. Now, the final point is why proving the sexual revolutionary is wrong. Why that's not enough. Now, this was a tough one for me. This was really hard for me to face because I spent many years, not many years, but probably 3 years or 4, debating the whole question of whether marriage should be redefined from being a union of a man and a woman to being a union of any two persons, because that's really what the whole gay marriage thing was really about. It was about redefining marriage. And I won many of those debates. I mean, I debated in law schools, quite a few of them. And people would come up to me afterwards and say, you know, you really made me think about that. I never thought of that before, and so on. And so I was shocked that when we were winning arguments, why aren't we winning the war? You know, how could this happen? What is happening? And I think what we have to understand is that, yes, you have to have correct arguments. You have to have evidence. You got to have your ducks in a row. But you have to understand that for the person who's motivated principally by a fantasy ideology, your facts and arguments are not going to be enough. Because that dream, that fantasy, that ideology, that's what's drawing them. That is taking the place of, you know, what we would call the beatific vision. Right, for a lot of people, and it's comparable. This is why it's not left and right, why that whole left-right thing doesn't really work anymore, okay? For the communists, the dream of a classless society kept them going, that fantasy. You know, they were drawn to that. For the fascists, the dream of the Volk, the dream of nationalism, that's what kept them going. That's what allowed them to overlook the problems, because they were wrapped up in the fantasy of it. And the same is true for our sexual revolutionaries. If we could just have more contraception, we wouldn't have these problems. If we just had more aggressive sex education, we wouldn't have these problems. All these problems would go away if these crazy Christians would shut up and stop making people feel bad. Right? They're enthralled with that fantasy. That's I think the positive way to look at it. But underneath that fantasy is the secret or not so secret desire for power. That this is a very empowering ideology for people who already have a lot of power. So a guy, let's see, do I have this guy here? No, I don't have this guy here. I'll just mention this briefly and I'll mention it more tomorrow. If you're a guy like Harvey Weinstein, a guy who's rich, powerful, influential, you can have what you want. The only thing that stops you from having what you want is the girl who says, no, I'm not going to do this. And a culture which says, I don't care how much money you have. You don't get to do whatever you want. I'm sorry. It's just not done. We don't do that. The guy who's really lusting for power needs to shut off that kind of ideology that says you don't get to do whatever you want. And this whole sexual realm has a lot of necessary taboos, a lot of necessary self-constraints on what we do and don't do. And so if you can take down that moral constraint, then you're empowered. The already rich, the already powerful, they become more powerful and more well-to-do, they get more of what they want. If nobody thinks there's anything wrong with it, right? If we could just make you guys be quiet, then everybody will comply and go along with it. Not to mention that there are people who are making money, who are actively making money off the sexual revolution. But even apart from that, there's this whole aspect of power and the power plane. So that's the point. Because I see this happening all the time. The people will say, you know, those crazy people, look at transgenderism and feminism contradict each other. Ha, 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 they're crazy. This thing's a house of cards. It's going to collapse. It is crazy, but it will not necessarily collapse. We do have to keep pushing on it, right? You have to, you know, somebody has to blow on the house of cards for it to fall down. And so we have to understand that that's what we're dealing with. If their goal is power, the fact that it's irrational is fine, because it takes a lot of power to do the impossible. That's what you have to see. It takes a lot of power to do the impossible. So if power is the goal, the fact that it's impossible doesn't bother you. That doesn't even slow them down. That's part of what we're dealing with. So our response to this has to be to live in the truth. You've got to be careful of your language. You've got to be careful of what you say. And you've got to live in the truth. You've got to speak the truth in love, but you cannot give ground on the use of language and the use of ideas here. Okay, so all of this is laid out in the book, The Sexual State. And so the call to action number 3 is buy the book. Okay, so that's it for now, and I'll be happy to take questions. I don't know what our time frame is, Dustin, but Dusty, but I'm good to take questions if people want to.
I'd like to ask the first question.
I know I've worn everybody out.
Monica Miller was here a couple of years ago at our Midwest Camp Conference. She kind of said the same thing you did, that proving that the baby, the unborn baby, is a human being really doesn't matter
Right.
to the poor Russians.
Right.
Because you still want to kill it.
Right.
It's still power that goes with
Right, that's right. That is a specific instance of this general problem. That's right. Did everybody hear what she said? Yeah. He's got a microphone for you.
I have a cousin.
No, you need the mic. This is being recorded and it's being uploaded directly to the National Security Administration.
I have a cousin who got married late, probably in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, and he called me on the phone and said, you know, my wife wants a baby. And now here's the thing with women, whatever they want, they end up getting. So what they did...
What?
Women are relentless. That's not part of it. So she called me.
That's the real reason Bruce Jenner wants to be a woman. This is hurting my head.
So she called me and she said, I'm pregnant. I said, well, what sort of legerdemain did you have to go through to make that happen? Because she was in her 50s.
Oh my God.
And she said, well, that's not a very good response. And but I wanted to know. So I found her my cousin. They bought an egg from a woman.
Yeah.
Shame on that woman of giving away her identity for money. It just bothers me. So I said, well, Doug, what did you do? You went in a room and you beat off, right? I said, did you look at dirty magazines? He said, no, they got videos.
Oh, that is okay. If it's a video, it's just...
So anyway, they had a test tube baby implanted in her womb. It was a safe delivery. The child was Daniel. And my cousin's smart. That whole side of the family is smart. His wife is smart. The kid... Ellen, his mother, has no more relationship to him genetically than a babysitter. He's going to sense that and figure that out because he's not stupid. He is going to...
How old is he now?
He's probably about 16.
Oh.
It's going to dawn on him that, Mom, there's something abnormal here. Now, I've been praying that God... Doug had the misfortune of being an academe all his life. He's an astrophysicist. and they're all the same. So he announced that there are 2 family reunions ago, these are atheists. All right, fine. So I've been praying that through Daniel, that Daniel would have such a significant experience when he comes to the realization that his mom's a fraud, that he doesn't know who his mother is, and that he's in a way he doesn't know what he is. Right? So
do you have much to do with him? Do you spend much time with him?
no, he's off on the East Coast. But my prayer for him is that God will work with him and bring the family to faith. But here's my question. I'm going to get around to my question. How much anecdotal information do you have about kids who are the result of a borrowed egg, figuring it out, and what has been the experience?
Yes, I know something about that, if I may. I do know something about that. First of all, what I would say to you is that I would do, since this boy is now 16, I think you should try to cultivate your own relationship with him, so that you can be available to him, and don't bad on his mom to him. He'll figure it out himself, whatever's going on. So we actually have a pamphlet, which I didn't think of bringing with me this time, but we have it online, and it's called Children in Donor Conception. So like this chart that we had here about children of divorce, we have a comparable pamphlet for children of third-party reproduction and donor conception, and IVF, artificial reproduction. So it turns out that what we know pretty significantly about the medical issues associated simply with IVF, there are a set of risks associated with IVF, okay, that are medical, that are quantifiable, and so on. And they some have to do with preterm birth and low birth weight, but others have to do with other things that are a little bit more subtle. What we know about the psychology of the children figuring it out and so on is much more anecdotal, mostly because most people don't want to know. Okay, this is the kind of research that no one wants to invest in, this kind of research. The IVF companies, and it is a company, it is an industry, right? They have every interest in producing research that says it's all fine. So what we know anecdotally is that the kids, there's been one sort of systematic study of that I know of, and what the kids will say is that they do wonder who their parent is. They do wonder about encountering an unknown half-sibling, okay, which is a bigger issue for the children of sperm donors than egg donors, right? Because there are cases of men having, fathering 500 children, and they do have this sense of being cast adrift, and not knowing who they are and wanting to know, and the difficulties that they encounter. There are a couple of websites out there that people use to try to find their relatives, and that people use to kind of commiserate amongst themselves about what this was really like. One of them is called, there's one called Them Before Us, which is by a lady named Katie Faust, and she basically advocates for a lot of the same things that we do, and she's got a collection of stories about this. And what's the other guy? I can't remember the other guy. But there is another guy, there is a guy that I have encountered who has reason to believe that he has 500 half-siblings. And he literally moved it because he found out who his bio dad was. His dad masturbated into a cup once a month for the entire time he was in medical school for like 10 years. And this young man basically kept encountering people who looked strangely like himself. And he finally decided to move away because it was just too creepy. Kind of not, it was just, so it's very dark, actually. I would really encourage you, those of you who encounter this, who have a person that you know, I mean, what the church teaches is that person is still a child of God, no matter how weird, no matter what crazy thing might have happened. That person is still a child of God, loved by God. So there's nothing wrong with the child, but what was done to them, for them, was unjust. And I would encourage you to be as, to try to be there with that person and for that person as much as you can, because it's going to be weird. I mean, some people it doesn't bother. But some people it bothers a lot. It bothers a lot when it does bother. And you have no right to assume that we'll all be blind. That's something that really bugs me. Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Morse, you talked about language being important when we
Yes.
talk about these things. I want to talk about gender ideology
Yep.
because probably many of us in here know someone who has the gay nephew, whatever, member. So, and I encounter this in Topeka. I love your manifesto, by the way, and laws, and that's part of it. But it begins in the grassroots, how we talk to our neighbors. How do we talk about the gender ideology when my neighbor has a gay son or daughter or trans? Wonder if you can just give some tips about how to speak about it.
Yes. Okay, so first of all, and I will talk more about this very issue tomorrow, but let me just say one thing. I avoid using the term gay whenever possible, and I would encourage you to do that as well. The church does not use the term gay, okay? The church avoids using that term, and here's why. Because we believe people are created male and female. We do not believe people are created straight and gay. Everybody's created straight, right? If something goes wrong, I mean, there are a lot of things that can go wrong, but we don't believe people are born that way. That is not a trait of the person. It's an accidental, what St. Thomas would call an accident, an accidental feature of the person. It's not an intrinsic fact about the person. So I would strongly urge you to avoid the term gay. You can use the term same-sex attracted. You can use the term homosexually inclined. And if you have a friend, especially a young friend, who says, "Mom, I'm gay," here's what I suggest. Ask them, "What do you mean? What do you mean when you say that?" And then that gives you an opportunity to find out what's on their mind when they're saying this. Because they might mean that that they have deep-seated same-sex attraction, they've had it as long as they can remember, or they might think that the kids in the gay club are cool and that's what they want to identify. There's all kinds of things that especially a young person might mean, so give them a chance to talk. So that I would start with that, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow, and maybe you can bring this up again if there's more that you think should be added to it. Yes, question in the back.
Yeah, unfortunately, we all here find ourselves in a position, right, for the Catholic Church. We're very well aware that when you were talking about speaking truth to power, we could think of, ideologies outside the church, the power players outside the church.
Right.
But what about inside the church?
Mm-hmm.
There's power inside the church. And like you said, the church's teachings are correct, but not everybody in the church is correct. So what would your suggestion be for those, because you said we have to do this, the grassroots has to do this. So how do we speak truth to power in our own hierarchical church?
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. So again, if we don't cover it all, bring it up again. But what I would say to you, first of all, is that each of us should be thinking in terms of what we can do that is within our power and authority to accomplish. And I think a lot of times we too quickly say, the bishop should do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
Well, no doubt, there are many things the bishop should do, and there's many things fathers should do. But there are things we can do and should do and must, at this point, must do, okay? So that's the first point, is trying to recalibrate your brain a little bit on that point so that we're not always running to them, okay? And how do we speak to them? It depends on the issue. I mean, this is a situation that requires enormous amount of prudence and judgment and knowledge of the local situation. I would never presume to give you a blanket, how to do it kind of thing. I will tell you that I'm not ashamed to say that the Ruth Institute is involved in gathering data on the subject of clergy sexual abuse. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about some of the studies that we've produced. And I'm also not ashamed to say that we are perfectly willing to be engaged in a public witness campaign if we think that's necessary. So earlier this year, we were part of a group that tried to persuade Cardinal Mahoney to step down and not speak at the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress. We were part of that, okay? And I formed a little internet secret Facebook group, and we had petitions, and we sent mean letters and nice letters. We did a number of things. It turned out we didn't get it to stop doing it, but I thought there was some chance that we might succeed. Let me tell you my thought process.
Yeah.
and then you can apply it to whatever your situation was. I thought, first of all, he was supposed to speak in Scranton, and he was pressured into withdrawing from that. He was supposed to speak in Salt Lake City, and he was pressured from withdrawing from that. And so I thought, well, this is not hopeless, right? That there's some chance that we could get him to step in. And by the way, in case people are not aware, Cardinal Mahoney has a very, very bad record of covering for clergy sexual abuse within the state of California, within the particularly Southern California. It's a matter of public record. It was not speculation on our part. It was not, me doing a little internet search or something and going, oh my gosh, I'm shocked. A lot of people know this. The Los Angeles Times documented it thoroughly. It's not like, this wasn't a close call, right? And so that part of my thought process was, we have some chance of succeeding. Another part of my thought process was, Cardinal Mahoney has the authority and the power to do what I'm asking him to do. I just want you to stay home that day, sir. You can stay home. Right? This can be done. It's not that hard. It's not like you're saying, Pope Francis, clean the church and throw all these guys in jail. They're not going to do it. They can't do. You know what I mean? A lot of times people get upset and they bang the table. And there's no point in that. So my thought was, he could do this. And we would know if he had done it, because he wouldn't be there. We could tell if we had succeeded. So those were the considerations that went into my thought process of why we could do this campaign and it might amount to something. So we didn't succeed in getting him to the immediate objective, but what we did succeed in doing was in kind of gathering a group of people together who are now kind of on standby. To do other kinds of projects that might need to be done. And there are just different situations around. But I will tell you, in the months that have passed since then, it is not that easy to come up with a project where you can have a bunch of strangers, people outside the diocese, for instance, chiming in and saying, Bishop so-and-so, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Because a lot of times you don't know all the facts. If you're there and you're in the situation and you know the people and you're confident of your facts, that's a whole different thing. But if you're on the outside looking in, I'm not going to lead people into into kind of not only a pointless crusade, but a mistaken crusade. I don't want to smear somebody or something. You know what I mean? So that's a big part of it as far as dealing with the hierarchy. But the other piece of it is that it's, I think, very important for people like you here in this room, listening to this presentation after the fact. It's very important that you educate yourself about church teaching and that you teach it, that you talk about it, that you defend it. Father doesn't want to defend it because he's got a boyfriend or some darn thing. I don't know what's going on. Right. I mean, we now know that this is a lot of what's going on. Okay, fine. We can't deal with that, but doggone it, the truth is still the truth. So we'll teach it. People will have a chance to hear it. And maybe Father will be convicted of not in a penal sense, but intellectually convicted. That maybe he should stop doing what he's doing, or whatever. So that's the way I look at it. Does that make sense to everybody? I mean, this is a difficult situation that we're in. Very difficult. But if we keep our wits about us, we can make some progress here. Because the sexual revolutionaries do not look very good right now. One has to admit, they look like slime. They look bad.
And I think
People covering for
to
them.
question that
You're what?
with respect, as respectfully as you can with the facts that you have.
Right.
If no one says anything, then they'll think, okay, we're getting away with this. If you bring it forth and ask the question, why is this being done?
Right.
Then they have to give you, or they should give you an answer.
Right.
And I think we can do that as laity. I think we have a responsibility.
I think that's right. What she said was, you can continue to bring the question, and they may ignore you, but you're putting them on the spot. You're making it harder for them to ignore you. And that's what we can do. That's within our power and our authority to do. Notice we're not trying to upend the ecclesial structure. I would never say that. That we're supposed to. I'm a brilliant woman, so I should be ordained. Now, come on, like I need another job. I mean, stop. You know, we don't need to do that. We can't go there, but within our role, we can get something done. So, yes, somebody else.
I have a question about the lack of parental constitutional rights
Oh.
and how they are being taken advantage of, especially in California, where the children are being subjected to, oh gee, you're having a bad day today, perhaps it's because you're a transgender.
Mhm.
And as a parent, when you begin objecting to this, I mean, there's court cases all over
Yeah.
that are really disputing the value of parental rights. And
Yes.
that it's not a constitutional right to teach your own child what your faith belief is.
So,
Are you addressing that at all?
okay, so this is a great thing that she just said. This is a very important, a very important thing that you just said. We don't address it directly in those terms, but we're involved in a lot of those issues, right? And so part of it is the parents' rights to their children, but it's also the children's rights to be governed by their parents, you know, to have the security of their parents.
Right.
One of the saddest things that we see in this area is divorce cases where one parent wants the child to go through with the transgender business and the other parent does not want that. And the court's siding with the ones who are pro-transgender. That's really scary, okay? So, and that's a particular instance of the court getting involved in the life of the family. So I think, honestly, the deepest issue, the deepest form of that issue is what goes on routinely in family courts in divorce. What happens routinely in there is the court becomes involved in the life of the family and divides up the assets, divides up the time that parents can spend with their children and so on and so forth. That whole set of machinery is already in place, and now it's being put to these additional purposes. That plus sex ed. See, that's another thing about the Manifesto. Sex ed is another. That's been in place for a long time, and it has never been a good thing, but it's gotten more and more toxic.
Right, there was a bill or a provision made in California where a senator or a congressman, I can't remember which, but where you opt into sexual education. So right now you have to opt out, but now they're saying you can't do that.
You can't opt out.
You
Yeah,
cannot
that's what
opt
they're
out
trying to
anymore.
do. That's what they're trying to do. With the LGBT ideological stuff, that's the part. They were always, for a while, they were willing to allow parents to opt out of the condoms on bananas part, that part of the sex ed. But now they're becoming increasingly less willing to do that. And what I want to say about that is, again, we let that go. We never should have let them be teaching sex ed in the school at all. At all. It doesn't even matter what the content of the thing is. It shouldn't be done in the school. It should be taught by parents in the home, in the privacy and comfort and sanctity of the home, not by strangers in a public place with a bunch of other kids. You know, but we let that go, and now it's gotten more and more toxic. And it's just compounded itself. So that's why, to me, I feel like that's where we make our biggest contribution as a Ruth Institute, is we try to get to the heart of the matter. And then when we've got people who are working on particular things, I'm not the kind of person who goes to legislatures and stuff like that. That's just not me, and so that's not our organization. But we do try to provide information to people who need it and put people together. You know, when I hear about somebody doing this or that, oh, you should call Jeff. Oh, you should call someone. You know, that's more our particular role. And that just means we need more people, so maybe that's your role.
That's not my role.
Yeah, all right, whatever. Go ahead.
Okay, I've read where the sexual revolution basically had its roots way before the 60s, maybe
Yes.
100 years or so before. What was the original intent of the sexual revolution, and the way it kind of developed and spread? What's your thoughts on if it's being diabolic?
Oh, there's no question it's diabolical. It's just a question of what are the human agents of the diabolos, okay? So when you say you have read that, it went back 100 years or something, what, is there something particular that you have in mind? That you can remember? Okay, so there's a very good book on this subject that I like a lot. It's called Libido Dominandi, by a guy, isn't that a cool name? Libido Dominandi is Latin for the lust for power. And it's by a guy called E. Michael Jones, and it's a very thorough book that has a lot of good information in it. He takes it back to Marquis de Sade around the time of the French Revolution. Okay, so that guy was just a nut job who wanted to do whatever he wanted. You know, I mean, so, and then there's this guy, Wilhelm Reich, in Germany, who was in like the 30s. And he wanted to just do what he wanted. Right. So there are various kinds of happy faces that they paste over the top of what they're doing. Then don't forget Alfred Kinsey. We mustn't forget Alfred Kinsey. That whack job. So we've got various people with various kind of happy faces that they're putting on what they're doing. But at the end of the day, for a lot of them, they just want to do what they want to do, and they want an excuse to do it, and they want fewer constraints on them as they do it. So Sade is like that. Reich is like that. Reich, he was crazy. I mean, you know, Kinsey, nobody, I talk about Kinsey in my book, nobody would have ever heard of Alfred Kinsey if it weren't for the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation financed him. So, anyway, am I answering your question? I don't even remember exactly what your question was. And you put in a quarter and I start talking.
Well, you mentioned a lot of individuals.
Yes.
But what do you think the original intent was? I know that the power and sexuality and all that, but the way you see it, that exploded in the 60s, you know, it was guided, it was led. What's the outcome supposed to be?
Oh,
what do you think
well,
people
okay, so you got more than one question there. Okay, so in the as to what was guiding it, what was promoting it, there were different people guiding different parts of it, and I do talk about that in the book. The population control people are extremely important in this whole thing, because without that part of it, none of the rest of it would have been possible. So you've got people like John D. Rockefeller III and his various, compadres, various people who thought, for one reason or another, there are too many people, we got to do something about it. Too many poor people, we need abortion, we need contraception, blah, blah, blah. So this is a handful of very wealthy people who have a vision, and they're not communists. Okay, that's the other thing you got to know. Rockefeller's not a communist. Henry Kissinger, not a communist. You know, so they have this vision. There's too many people, and those are the guys who pump lots of money into promoting abortion and contraception, and still to this day, that's a lot of what it is. And you can actually see a pinpointed date when they stopped talking about population control and started talking about women's empowerment. Because they figured out that everybody thought population control was creepy, and they didn't want to do it. But as soon as they started saying, oh, women are going to be empowered, Rockefeller figured this out in 1974. He gave this speech in Bucharest. And all of a sudden, there's this thing called feminism that's all of a sudden very well funded. But only a certain sort of feminism is very well funded, right? The kind that promotes abortion, so that part of it is well funded, kind of organized, kind of hanging together, and that kind of thing. The divorce side, on the divorce side, the American Law Institute was instrumental in redefining the divorce laws. What they got out of it and why they did it is not 100% clear to me. The feminists didn't drive that ship. Once it got going, they jumped on and steered it a certain way. But the move for no-fault divorce, for taking adultery out of the code as being a marital fault, that happened. You know, that was going on with the ALI. So
okay. So to push the population control, they put it under a sexual revolution to make it more to make it better or easier to serve up to the public.
They put the feminist label on it. They put the women's empowerment label on it to make it more palatable. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think you would find feminists saying that, because there are lots of different types of feminists and they quarrel amongst themselves. But I think they would agree that was kind of the defining thing. And the women who look at that and go, we're really pushing this too hard, they don't get funded. They don't get attention in the same way that what's become become mainstream is the thing that has become funded. I want to answer one other part of your question, though, because a lot of times people ask me this, Dr. Morse, where is this going? What's the end? What do they want? Where is this thing going? And I will tell you where it's going. The gender ideology, what they want is to completely remove male and female from the legal code and from society. They resent male and female. They want to wipe all of that out of society, out of your mind, out of advertising, everything. Male and female's got to go. That's the gender ideology. The divorce ideology, I will tell you what those people want. And you can only see this by reading the law review articles, you know, the sex radicals, what they're saying to each other in their law journals and things like that. What they want is contract parenting. They want to disconnect parenthood from biology. They resent the fact that there's a biological connection between a child and two specific adults who might or might not want it, okay? They want it to become a contract so that any set of people can make a deal, kind of like your cousin did, right, to purchase an egg, purchase a surrogate, in the services of a surrogate, have a contract between 2 or 3 people to divide up the care of the child and the legal rights of the child. They want it all to be done by the will of the adults and having nothing to do with biology. You don't want to privilege the biological parent. That's the way they think, okay? So that's what they want there. And the end game of the contraceptive ideology absolutely is population control. That is absolutely where those guys want to go. And they got a lot of people who are, you know, kind of like dupes, you know, who don't get that that's where the thing's going and they're participating because they like it. You know, but all ideologies have that, right? If you think back on all the different crazy ideologies of the 20th century, they've all had people like that who believed in the cause and didn't see or didn't want to see, you know, the other side effects and consequences and so on.
So they want to break a new world.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr.